My name is Mohan Reddy. After hearing a very exciting speaker and then a more pragmatic speaker, let me get you a little different perspective of what IoT means to me in coming 5 years. I actually handle 3 distinctly different roles. There's no denying at all, there's lots of overlap. So let me get you 3 perspectives that I have from the 3 roles I have as I handle them today. The first is that I currently have the role of being the chairman of NASSCOM, which is the National Association for Software Services Companies, which is now, it's the largest trade body in India for information technology and information technology enabled services, which has grown from nowhere to about $148 billion last year, billion, BSB, and contributes to about 8.5% of GDP of India currently. And there is tremendous amount of work that's being done from NASSCOM membership in many areas, including IoT. And I'm a firm believer that the IoT could be a social leveler for emerging countries around the world. No denying at all, my comments could be largely limited to India, but all the same, they apply to any other emerging country all around the world. If you look at India today, as I said, with the $148 billion IT industry, or about 3.1 million software professionals who are directly employed in this industry, there are about, I believe, 10 million of them who are indirectly employed in this industry. You find that we are at the leading edge of technologies as an industry at this point of time. You can name the Fortune 100 companies. All the 100 companies are either use an Indian company, or my good friends like IBM also have a fairly large base in India in doing applications or doing services for their customers or for themselves. So the result is that the best of the breed from anywhere in the world is back there in India. And therefore, at a policies level, the government has put in this big logo which says IT plus IT is equal to IT, which effectively saying that India today plus information technology, obviously saying it's what is today, well, what will be India tomorrow. Basically, there could be a number of applications that could go by and certainly change the face of the nation. And IoT has a very critical component in the whole thing, because India has been talking about trying to say, how do we bring about a social equalizer for the various communities in India? Like many other countries in the world, the divide between the rich and the poor is very high. But I think today, people like me at the policy level, when we talk to government, are promoting very intensely that technology could be one enabler which could efficiently enable equalizing the various different status of the society. So look at what is the society today into, whether it's agriculture, that's one need that they have. Then they have a need on healthcare, hygiene, it is governance, and so on and so forth. So there are plenty of areas in which the government today has a focus on to make sure that this change comes in. And in each one of them, you can think about how IoT will play a very important role. And that's my belief, that IoT will play an important role and also bring about the change. Take the example of agriculture, where there's a certain amount of experimentation that's happening at this point of time. We find that you can measure the color of the crop using an IoT device. You can measure the water requirements. In India, the agriculturist does not get more than 4 hours to 6 hours of power every day for wetting his crop. Even a very frugal innovation that we did of the recent past, where the agriculturist actually gets an SMS as soon as the power comes back to his field. That's basically a sensor device which is detecting that the power is back in the network, and as a result that he has to start putting the pump on, or you can now get into a level of automation where the pumps get switched on. If they get switched on without power being there are also challenges associated with them. So, or you take the example of healthcare. Today, India has about 70% of its population in rural India, a 1.2 billion people country. and not many doctors are willing to go down to the rural areas. And with the medical equipment, which now uses Internet of Things quite intensely, sensors, whether they're to do with pressure sensors, they're the accelerometer, gyroscopes, and so on and so forth. I'm sure many of you know many examples of that nature. What we find is that the healthcare issues can also be addressed using IoT of things. And in the next 5 years, there is going to be a tremendous amount of transformation. But a key to it is, of course, to build a broadband. Because without connectivity, where does this go in? So I think rightly so, the government has now gone ahead and decided to put a broadband in place together. India has something like 223,000 villages, I believe. Villages would get, these are the villages which could be identifiable. And then that could be the nodal point. From there, you could get connected to people around you. So if you want to address the larger group of population of a nation of a size like India or China or any other developing country, to me, technology is the key driver. And technology, like Internet of Things, is the one which will make sure that we will be in a position to bring this equalizer. Certainly, the industry today is very equipped in India because we have a number of projects that we have handled, which have been transformative, which have been innovative for customers all around the world. I'll talk about a few things as we move forward in terms of what we have done ourselves as a company. But given, if you have an intent in making sure that technology can be driver, you create the infrastructure in terms of broadbanding, infrastructure in terms of literacy, and finally the most important one, which we all work right now as a part of our corporate social responsibility, is also making sure that there is enough of literacy that is created for people to use these new technologies which are now being deployed by the government. IoT to us, from the industry perspective, is very important. The government recognizes it to the extent that in addition to a number of corporates which have their own IoT labs, interestingly, the government has now set up IoT labs. They funded 10 of them. The first one is up in Bangalore. The other 9 will come up fairly shortly. Actually, it is a joint venture between NASSCOM, which is the industry trade body, versus the government itself. So that's the type of emphasis that is being placed. And we certainly see that affordability, which will be a big challenge so far in India, would also be addressed through IoT. You can see medical equipment, which today, with the type of sensors which have dropped in price, I believe the sensor last average I saw was somewhere between 51 to 52 cents at this point of time. With that level of pricing that we have, people are in a position to get down to equivalent of medical equipment. I know somebody who has developed a defibrillator. It's a transnational project. It's US-based and India-based. Where they're saying the defibrillator would cost 1/3 of what it would cost what's there in the marketplace. The bill of material is there, certification is going on, and so on and so forth. So therefore, to me, what I see 5 years from today, as far as the Internet of Things is concerned, and especially from the perspective of developing nations, that it can be a social equalizer. Let me move on to the second perspective I have. I also run a company called Cylent. I'm the chairman of the board. I'm the founder of the company. And of course, these days I don't run the business, but I certainly get involved in terms of our long-term perspectives. A company which I found about 24 years back, grew it to be 14,000 people. That's where we are in terms of number of people who work in the company. We operate in about 36 countries across the world and employ about 24 different nationalities in the world. Our focus is basically engineering and manufacturing. And where we see enormous amount of change coming in engineering and manufacturing is also application of IoT. And what we are doing at this point of time in doing the IoT is one of the things that my earlier speakers also talked about is Industry 4.0. But my belief is it's not 4.0, it will become 5.0 and 6.0 very quickly too, because the pace at which the technology is changing. We see very clearly at this point of time that the cyber world is meeting the physical world with Industry 4.0, largely being driven by Internet of Things. So we work with one of the largest German automation companies, providing them the solutions in terms of how they could do industry automation in their manufacturing facilities. And if this is going to be true and valid, that if you want to get more amount of automation into the factory floors, which is Industry 4.0, you need to also have fairly smart machines. It can't be without smart machines. We can get down to doing automation. Just putting the IoTs may not be good enough. And so I think is the next issue that's about the 3D printing that will come into play. And 3D printing seems to be really beating up the imagination of anybody at this point of time. We talked about a number of examples by the earlier speakers on what IoT or what 3D printing could do. But the one which one of our customers is working on currently is how we can also do plastic and electronics printing together. So there's nothing called embedding a silicon chip into a plastic device. It's all there built into the plastic device itself, so that the sensor is not anymore external to the device, but internal to the device. So we are in a position to now produce products which are far, far different from what they are. And with internet coming into play, that certainly we would see that more amount of efficiency comes to the industrial systems. 5 years from now, automation will be the key buzzword. In the light of when occasionally I keep saying when I speak in forums like this, you may not find Mohan Reddy on the dais. It could be a robot which can also come and deliver the speech. But I think when we especially heard our first speaker today, I was wondering whether it's already there because you just had chip, but you've probably had more amount of electronics in the system. He could be as good as a robot at that point of time, but I'm not too sure it'll happen too quickly. But what we're seeing further in terms of manufacturing is also the manufacturing systems are changing. That's the Industry 4.0. But coupled with that, the design systems are also changing. Design is no longer being today inhibited by manufacturing. I think two things not many people recognize, that we don't design products like what we like to design because you have constraints in terms of manufacturing and also materials. Even in case of materials, the changes are coming in. You can see on the YouTube a couple of examples that people keep showing, that you take a small little ball, which is a table tennis ball, and put a little child of 2 years old, step on the ball, and it flattens out. You put a tungsten carbide coating on it at a nanomaterial level, and you could even ask an elephant to step on top of it. It doesn't crumble or crush itself. So there is enormous amount of change that's happening in materials. So it's a combination of Internet of Things, the 3D printing, and the material changes that are there will redefine the whole of manufacturing industry and the associated application to them. Maybe relevant that, in Internet of Things, we do a couple of things which we feel very excited about. We do what is called as engine health monitoring systems. I think our earlier speaker talked about predictive maintenance. There's nothing called breakdown in machines that would happen anymore. It amazes me itself. One of our customers who actually manufactures aircraft engines, it was a joint project. The patent is with the customer, but the work was done by us. We put this application called the engine health monitoring system, engine flying at 40,000 feet above the ground, and still we are monitoring the vibration on the shaft, or the leak in the gearbox, or how the externals are behaving. So the result is that you could quickly do a fix if it is a simple one, or the moment the aircraft comes down on the ground, you're in a position to take the engine out, put a brand new, put an engine which is already fully functional, so that there's nothing called breakdown for the aircraft as such. The aircraft engine could have gone for a maintenance. So also we have yet another application which is on rail equipment at this point of time, which is to do what is called as Orbiflow, which gets done for one of the largest European train manufacturers, who might be headquartered in France, all right. But primarily what we do for them is exactly, every coach now has IoT built into them, so that it is constantly monitored. The data goes to the wayside equipment. Wayside equipment then sends it to the next train station on which the train is calling. And if there is repair that's to be done, the right crew with the right spares are standing at the right place in order to ensure that they can replace the part. It could be as simple as water in the washroom, it could be light not there in the cabin, or it could be a vibration of the axle, or it could be the heat of the brake that could be there. Or the other way around is that we also get involved in IoT at this point of time in building health monitoring systems. And where we think that, it's no longer that the doctor, I think there was one of those examples that was given earlier, the patient does not need to call the doctor calls the patient. You have chronically ill people who have certain parameters under which they still be working with the medication that goes on. If these critical parameters go outside the limits, the doctor gets an alert on a SMS machine itself or a mobile device. So the result is what we are seeing is that enormous amount of change that will happen into manufactured design of products, which will change our lives as we move forward. That's my second role. And the third one that I have is that I also head at this point of time as the chairman of the board of one of the premium education institutions called the IITs. IITs are Indian Institute of Technologies, and these are the best of engineering schools in India. And my focus there in IIT these days is more on entrepreneurship, innovation, and startups. I don't know, some of you must have been fairly familiar with this, that 60% of the jobs that get created around the world get created by new companies. And especially in countries like India, there is a crying need for more amount of jobs. So therefore, we have to get into a mode of job creators, more amount of entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship gets preceded by startups, startups gets preceded by innovation. So innovation as a movement today is big in India. Primarily, if one could always say, can you teach innovation? I think you can create a culture of innovation. In my own company, I keep saying that the DNA is changing to get into more into innovation as a culture. And that is possible, so long as you can start getting a culture which says that, please challenge the status quo, take risks, be very passionate about what you do, and work in teams and be open about what you're doing. If these 5 traits can be put together, innovation can come in. And certainly you couple with that, once innovation comes in, that has to get created into a product. So you need to have the right ecosystem with the entrepreneurship. One could always question this, saying that can entrepreneurship be taught? Certainly not. Again, entrepreneurship cannot be taught. But what we have seen in very controlled experiments is, if you create the right entrepreneur, right ecosystem, somebody said ecosystem may not be a great word, but I'll still use it. If you create the ecosystem, then entrepreneurship can be created, it can flourish, and it can grow by itself. So the result is, if you look at India today again, enormous amount of effort going on in making sure that we create that ecosystem in terms of, incubator centers, ecosystem for making sure there's enough of funding to come by, or there are mentors associated with them, or the test labs, and so on and so forth. All that would mean that, you can get into a model where the ecosystem would definitely promote more amount of entrepreneurship. This may not be, as I said, only valid with only a country like India, but I've just been to Dalian last week for the World Economic Forum, and the same story goes on in China too. So therefore, it will be true everywhere. And what is driving the innovation, entrepreneurship, and the startups is technology. Technology which is driven by the IoT, Internet of Things. So what I would conclude at this point of time is by saying that there will be a tremendous amount of proliferation in every phase of, every facet of work and life with Internet of Things. That's the first proposition I have. The second one is that once it gets into every facet of work and life, life becomes much, much better for especially the disadvantaged communities all around the world. The second one is that the Internet of Things will certainly make life for existing companies very tough. It could be very disruptive. There are a number of examples, I'm sure you must have read about, how people did not recognize disruptive and companies have to fold it down. A classic story is all about Kodak. Kodak had $28 billion of market cap, did not earn, was the first company to innovate a digital camera, didn't recognize the deception in this particular innovation, and what was the end result of it is that they went bankrupt by 2011. So therefore, people have to recognize that the technology driven by Internet of Things has enormous amount of potential. It is disruptive, not necessarily to disrupt big companies too. I was talking to somebody in Dow Jones, Dow chemical company last few days again, and he was saying it appears on the superficially it appears at this point of time that large companies don't do so much amount of disruptive innovation. But the truth is that they're also certainly working on disruptive innovation like any other agile, small-sized companies. And finally, while these are all challenges, they all throw opportunities. So what I see is that IoT is a big, big opportunity. In 5 years, it'll transform the world. It'll transform the society. It'll transform the nations. It'll transform the applications to make life much, much better. With that, I will wish you all the best and thank you at this point of time. Thank you.